So in this episode of Inside Ice, I'm talking to Clarion Gaming's brand director, Jody Frost, to give everyone a bit of a flavour of really what goes into, not just marketing something like ice, but also building a brand around it. Because, let's face it, trade shows can become quite cold and quite transactional. And obviously in the industry, that's really changing a lot. So we're going to talk a bit about that today. So Jody, thank you very much for joining us.
That's a pleasure. Great to be here. Good to see you, Rob.
Fantastic. So just to start off, I thought it'd be quite interesting just kind of bring a bit more of you into it and just kind of find out a bit more about how you came to join Clarion. Like, what's your background? What's kind of like led you to ice?
Sure, yeah, gosh, what a question. How far back do you want to go? I suppose in recent times, I've probably spent the last 10, maybe 15 years of my career being a brand strategist. So that's been my kind of bread and butter. My pre-Clarion existence was very much focused more on FMCG and particularly in the alcohol sector. So had the privilege of working on some really great brands from some of the best known brands that you would have heard of, from Aperol Spritz and Glenfiddich and Hendrick's Gin, those kind of things, to some really sort of more small, either B2B interesting startups and some other kind of different product categories that I've worked in, just effectively building out brand strategy and making sure that when we have products and services that they are led to have more value than just what we're doing, and to try and align businesses behind their sort of brand, joined up brand vision.
Amazing. And so from that kind of branding perspective, I'm keen to get your thoughts on, I suppose, kind of ice as a brand, because let's face it, it's the biggest show in the industry, and I think that I think it's fair to say that kind of puts it, obviously it gives it a lot of power and a lot of weight, but it also potentially makes it feel a bit monolithic and a bit cold and a bit transactional. So I'm keen to get your thoughts on how, I suppose ironically, how you like, the work going into warm up the brand and kind of like humanize it.
Sure, yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, like I'm very much a believer that the ice show. I mean, the brand's been around now in various forms, but as ice since for over 80 years. So it's got a huge amount of heritage behind it, and it's very much the industry's show. Like, it is for the industry and owned by the industry. Of course, as Clarion, we are the organisers of it, and we have a duty of care to make sure it continues to exist and serve the industry. But I think definitely, largely because of its close association as part of that industry, and a lot of people, I've had lots of conversations with people who've been involved in the brand and have been part of the journey for certainly like the last recent history, and really understanding what their feelings about the brand are. And I think with any good brand strategy, what you're really doing, particularly when there's something existing, is it's not about reinventing, it's about just drawing out the things which are really special about that brand. And certainly some of the things that really came out to me early on, and obviously, as a brand strategist, you want to come in and make a big difference and sort of say, oh yes, before I was involved, it was doing this, and now it's doing something much better. But in reality, my process is very simple: to look at what a brand is fundamentally. What does it do? What's it there for? What value does it create? How it does it, which is sort of like gives us our tone of voice and our, I suppose, our special sauce and our unique character. What, I suppose, why we do this, and what's the driving thing? What's the thing that gets us out of bed in the morning? Like,
Yeah.
what's our purpose behind? Why are we trying to connect the industry? What's in it for everybody? And of course, who we are. Like, really a clear articulation of who we are as a brand. So I use that as a bit of a framework to build my any and all brand strategy work that I do. And I think really, what my tenure has been about is very much to try and draw out that together in a really unique and well articulated way. So I think, to get back to your question slightly, we had a really, really great brand in ice. It was very well known, but maybe there wasn't that much alignment behind exactly, if you ask 10 people what ice was and who it's for and so on and so forth, you probably get 10 different answers.
Yeah.
So for me, it's very much about sort of bringing that all together so that we can be really purposeful, I suppose, in sort of talking about what ice is. And certainly, whilst it's got a huge amount of history and heritage behind it, there is some really lovely character to the brand. I suppose its origins stem from like the end of peer shows where you had people who were effectively in the entertainment business and showmen who were putting on sort of fun experiences for people on the end of peers, through to what it is today. And of course that became a casino and gaming show and so on and so forth. But it's never lost that, we say internally, like it's got that swagger of a showman. We've never lost that sort of personality. And I think we're just finding ways all the time to bring that to life and bring back that sort of, linking in with the fact that we are existing within an entertainment industry, just trying to bring some of that, I suppose, showmanship back to what we're doing. And that hopefully really helps us become more relatable, and certainly is in terms of how we all exist as people within the organisation. There is that kind of approachability and that human side to ice. Of course we are effectively a trade show, but our role is literally nothing more than to put people together and connect people and provide them with sort of some form of insight and inspiration that enables them to sort of grow the industry. But within that, we have a role to play, and that's really what ICE is all about.
Fantastic. And when you think about building and I suppose evolving the ICE proposition, I mean, you touched on it there, we're essentially, from some angles, as an industry, part of the entertainment sector, and another, from another angle, we could be seen as part of technology. And then obviously you layer in, the kind of like the policy level that comes with something like gambling. I mean, it sets out a lot of scope to evolve and expand it. And I think we're kind of seeing some of that, for example, with brands like McLaren and Microsoft involved. But do you feel there are sort of limitations in the fact that it's ultimately a gambling show? Like as an industry, there's obviously certain kind of like emotive elements to that. I mean, like how do you go about kind of addressing that? Because it's really an issue that affects the entire sector, but also ICE within that as a show for that gambling industry. So how do you go about kind of sort of reshaping that perception kind of issue?
So I think that's probably one of the biggest questions facing the industry right now, right? I know we've sort of had previous conversations to that effect. I think fundamentally, we are a show for the gaming industry and the gambling industry. So that kind of defines who we are, really. That is the I suppose, in terms of what we do, we exist to provide that framework for the gambling and gaming industry. So that's a big part of us as a brand. So it certainly helps us define who we are as opposed to limit us. It like gives us a framework to work inside and a reason to be. I think as the industry has grown, certainly over the history of ICE, but more importantly the last sort of like more recent history, we're seeing some really important areas of not just a societal level, but from an industry level, the way that the industry is growing and changing. Regulation is always a key question, and certainly has been in my involvement for within the industry. To that, we also know we have the very real threat of the black market, and there is equally something which is incredibly important to us at Clarion is player protection, and you see that through things like our SGZ and all of the initiatives that we hope to reinforce and help support through the ICE platform. And I think you mentioned before around the sort of monolithic nature and the large scale of the show, and when I first got involved with looking at it almost from an objective point of view, I said, well, scale is great, but just size and numbers don't really mean anything unless you do something with that. We have to leverage that in a positive way to make it meaningful. Otherwise, it's just a slightly bigger show, and there isn't really much more to it than that. So I think because we have the market leading and world leading event, and it has that scale. It gives us the scope to really be a positive actor within the industry, and certainly very much as we move forward, like, you know, our World Gaming Forum and our World Regulatory Briefing and our, you know, some of the platforms that we have, that it starts to grow in terms of our ability to be an independent voice between regulatory and legislative bodies and the industry, you know, because we need to work together if we're going to solve problems within the black market, and enable positive, fair regulation for the industry to move forward. And that does require us to have that influence, and of course that scale does give us the influence, and I think that's really what's sort of very much part of us as a brand, and something that we're incredibly aware of and take very, very seriously in terms of what we can do to help improve those perceptions. You know, fundamentally, if we look at the industry as an entertainment industry, as we've said, obviously based in tech, very much a focus of people, you know, we talk about fun economy and various things. It provides a really, really important service, and if we don't enable some very real protection to be put in place, but also some very sensible regulation to enable that, then you know, we certainly aren't meeting our requirements as a member of the industry that takes its role very seriously.
Of course. And then just kind of zooming out of that slightly, just to, I suppose, really kind of like crafting a narrative around what ICE is and what ICE does in a more practical sense, because like a lot of what you've touched on there is a hell of a lot going on. You know, there's World Gaming Forum, there's show floor conferences, there's an esports tournament, there's brand activations, there's now the enterprise stage, there's this whole kind of festivalization of, you know, the venue and the city around the industry. And obviously there's elements that, you know, Clarion Gaming controls, but there's also the elements that spring up around that, whether that's kind of like parties, you know, special activations, which is, you know, obviously great because it shows just how important it is to the industry that all this stuff happens around the show that we put on. But in terms of kind of crafting that kind of narrative and that campaign, that's an incredible kind of maze for you and like your team to pull together, you know, kind of like a coherent kind of message. And I suppose really, well, not even one message, but just all the different messages of how these things all fit together. So I mean, how do you go about, you know, shaping that?
Very carefully is the short answer. No, I think it comes to we go back to our brand strategy, and this is why the model I use works, I think, really, really well. There's probably as many brand strategy models as there are brand strategists, but I use a really, really simple and practical brand strategy, which is who we are, what we do, how we do it, and why we do it, as I mentioned before. And really, we always come back to that. So fundamentally, when we raise things up to the level of why we do this, you know, our you know, I hate using this sort of brand vernacular like mission and vision and things like that, but when we look at why we do it, ICE exists to connect and inspire the modern global gaming industry, and that's, you know, what we're here to do. And the reason we do that is to help continue to build an industry that we're all really, really proud of. And if you sort of start with that as a bit of a North Star, as a bit of a purpose statement to work back from, then everything starts to fall out of that. So when we start looking at you know, the kind of platforms that we should introduce, we ask that question: is this helping us work towards that purpose? Is it helping us get towards where we as a business believe that we can help the industry develop and grow? You know, the perception piece is amazingly complex. I use the, you know, analogy with the kind of alcohol sector, you know, in terms of social perception and so on and so forth. Alcohol's done an amazing job of doing great PR for its industry. They've owned connectivity, and, you know, that's a really good basic human need. And I think, you know, ultimately as an industry, we maybe haven't been able to own that. And I think the more we look at it, like, protecting people from player harm and things like that is a really, really important thing to do. And the only way we can do that is to help drive the industry towards regulated markets. We know that the entire world is not regulated, and we know that it's a journey, but ultimately we need to be part of that. We need to help support it wherever we can. So that in itself does give us a really good way into sort of understanding why all these pieces fit together in the way that they do. So as long as we're able to work back to that brand strategy and sort of say, okay, if we're doing this, does this add value to our, to the industry, to our customers, or to our audiences? And if so, what? And does it work towards that sort of end purpose? And that helps us sort of craft that narrative. In terms of each year, we create a new sort of creative platform to help drive and inspire and I suppose connect with our audiences. And this year we're using Growing the Power of Play. And that really stems from us being super close to the industry and having conversations. Like at the end of every rendition of ICE, last year we had Explore the ecosystem of gaming. At the end of each rendition of ICE, we take an awful lot of surveys, we talk to a lot of people, and we understand, we take the temperature of the industry and understand sort of where we're going. And we know that moving forward, technology and AI is such a key factor. So we kind of overlay that with us as a business and what are we doing and why are we doing what we're doing, or perhaps us as a brand or an organisation, depending on how you'd like to consider it. But certainly what we then do is sort of say, okay, well, if we are here to deliver this and the industry is focused on this area, be it regulation, be it technology involvement, that's not even a word, technology development, and how we can do that. And ICE has, for the longest time, been that garden, if you will, that enables ideas to flourish. We try and provide a platform for connection, for insight, for intelligence, and for inspiration. So it sort of naturally falls in that power that play has, and ICE's role is to help foster the growth of it. So that kind of leads us into our creative platform for this year. And much the same previous years, last year was very much about exploring our new territories and new ecosystem. We are far more global than we've ever been before now with the relocation to Barcelona. And there was lots of different elements that came together to sort of drive that. But fundamentally, they all link back to the one core truth that is why ICE exists and what it's here to do. So it all sort of ties together in that way. And that becomes effectively, to use that corny brand phrase, it becomes our red thread that runs through absolutely everything we do.
No, that makes sense. And then I was just quite interested in measuring it because obviously, it's like, I think, I suppose there's some kind of parallels to what you and I do. I work more on the digital side, you work more on the live side, but in both cases, to an extent, it's a numbers game. It's how many people we get on the website, how many people we get through the doors of ICE. But there's also kind of intangibles to the measurement, and I'm just curious, like when it comes to kind of like building that kind of brand perception of something like ICE, it's like, how do you go about measuring it? What kind of makes you feel, kind of like confident that you're seeing it evolve and you're seeing that kind of affinity to the brand rather than the obligation kind of like building across the industry?
So really good question, and one that I and many brand strategists spend a lot of time thinking about. Really, it comes down to engagement levels and understanding what those engagement levels are. There's a very well practiced saying which is the value or the customer lifetime value of an engaged customer is double that of a satisfied customer. So in the metrics that we look at, we focus very much on sort of two key areas. One is to make sure that people are getting the value that they have come to receive. Yeah. So, are they making the right kind of connections? Are they meeting the right kind of people? Did they get a return on their investment, not just financially, but in their time and the effort and energy they're putting forward? And that kind of gives us a transactional value. So, they're satisfied because they've hit those goals. But we also look at different metrics, to your point, around sort of how much do they understand the proposition that ICE has. And that again comes back to the brand strategy model, and as part of the surveys and things like that we put out. So these things are really important. So for anyone who turns up to our events and thinks, why am I filling out the survey? We really do listen to them and use them, I can assure you. But we will ask people how much they understand and agree with why we exist. And the premise for me, the way that I measure that is there's sort of certain key questions that I will ask within that survey to sort of say, okay, how much do you agree or disagree with this statement, those kind of things. Yeah. Equally, we ask other questions around sort of emotional, less tangible things, like, how many people do you only see at ICE? There's a set of questions that we use to called the Gallup 12, which is based around people, largely more employee surveys and things like that, but their level of engagement in and around work. So we've leveraged some of that learning that we also include into our surveys, but principally we will also look at how important people think the show is to them and their businesses, because naturally they're indicators of what we do, and we will then use that as a kind of a recurring score, I suppose, to measure ourselves year on year, because I certainly have KPIs that I need to hit, and absolutely numbers are important, but fundamentally, as a business, it isn't just about numbers. It's about, are people getting the value that they want to that they want from us, and are we serving them in the right way? Are we giving them what they want? And do they believe in our mission? Are they part of our brand? I've said before that the industry owns ICE. We don't own it. We just deliver the show. Everybody who, certainly a large contingent of our audience. Of course, there are some people that are just there to because it's the largest show and they want to do business. Absolutely, but fundamentally, what we are seeing is that the industry as a whole does have a very clear affinity with ICE, and that's a very precious thing, and something that again we're hugely proud of, and work very hard to I suppose ensure that we don't flout that, and that we make sure that we are defending that, and we have our principles of what we're trying to do, and how we believe we can help have a positive effect on the industry and subsequently their businesses. So that's kind of a very waffly answer to...
No, I thought it was a really interesting answer. Just one final one. Right, you're a few ices in now, you're approaching veteran status. Best and worst moments of the show?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Best and worst moments of the show. I think there's always that moment, probably the worst moments, if we start with that first, the worst moments are around sort of not knowing how things are really going to go. Anybody who's ever been involved in putting on events or anything always has those slight nightmare scenarios where they turn up and the doors open and no one comes in. So that sense of dread as to will this really happen, and of course, like openly. Moving to Barcelona was a big challenge for me and my team, certainly, and even more for other areas of the business. But just those kind of fear, I suppose, of not really knowing until we saw the doors open and the crowds came in, and we had that lovely moment. There's loads of really good moments. I think there's lots of individual moments when we have conversations and you really feel that the work that my team have put in has been understood and appreciated, and when we have a lot of really positive feedback on the show, that's an amazing feeling for obvious reasons. But I think fundamentally there's a couple of moments throughout the show cycle where when the halls are full and the entrance has got people pouring in, you can almost feel all of these tiny little pockets of industry happening. It's almost like you can feel the energy in the room and the excitement around all of the deals that are being done. And ICE is not sort of one big event, it's a large space with like thousands and thousands, if not millions of little events happening, all those conversations that you hear. I think that moment, and it maybe happens once or twice when you're sort of standing at the show and just surveying, I suppose, when you're not running from meeting to meeting, but that's certainly a really valuable thing. I had a moment last year when I walked from one end of the hall to the other, and I just heard repeatedly, "Oh, great to meet you," and it was such a simple phrase that, because we had done our job well and because we had brought all those people together and connected the right numbers of people, it wasn't once I heard it, it must have been 50 times in the space of walking up and down the halls. And I just thought all of those little meetings, all of
Yeah.
those inconsequential moments, or not inconsequential, all of those serendipitous moments, should we say, really add up to something incredibly special. Like, you don't get that at other shows, you don't get that anywhere else in the industry, where we have that huge expanse of people that are all meeting, and just knowing that you're part of that association that brings all those people together to connect people and inspire people and get people excited about the industry is really rewarding. That's probably my highlights, I suppose.
Fantastic. Well, Jody, thank you very much for that. It's been really interesting to get a bit of, I suppose, a peek behind the curtain.
Pleasure. Pleasure. Thank you ever so much. It's been great.
Thank
Good
you.
to see you, sir.
And see you at ICE.
Okay.